thank you guys all for joining us. We understand that there's some other things going on tonight, but we appreciate you guys taking the time. And we are very grateful to have Karen Jones here with us from DC. And with that, Randy, did you want to do an introduction or?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm very proud to introduce Karen Jones, who is the historian at the International. First, thanks everybody for what you do every day at work, taking care of the community, working hard, putting yourself in the face of danger. You know, these are unprecedented times, but Teamsters, we do unprecedented things during unprecedented times. And as Karen can lay out in our history, she can show that Teamsters have always stepped up to the plate in times like these, as our members are doing right now. And we're going to do it again, just like she shows. But I want to talk about her for a minute. You know, she's a phenomenal individual, first and foremost, but has done just a great job as a historian in laying out the Teamster archives. And for those of you that, when you ever get a chance to go to Washington, D.C., I believe it's George Washington University that houses the Teamster archives that started in, I think it was 2008. And Karen is responsible for essentially bringing all of this history together. And it is absolutely amazing the amount of work that she has done over the last few years, and really, you know, just making sure that everybody doesn't forget our absolutely rich history as an organization. You know, this amazing collection that she has put together and the tremendous work that she's done so far does a great job of telling the story in so many different ways, our Teamster story here in America. And the reality is, you know, she tells this great story about Teamster women, about civil rights, about the politics and our political activities, about how we're industry leaders and our charity that we have done as an organization. You know, it makes us proud to be Teamsters. You know, those of us that have been Teamsters a long time, we have a bit of a swagger because, you know, we get to inherit, you know, the reputation of what all of these great people did for us. And as she walks through this journey that the Teamsters have taken in more than 100 years, you know, one of the things that really stands out is that union contracts have always been the difference between what happens for working people in America. Union contracts of what is really closed the gap of inequality. If you look at things from 1935 to 1965 and the inequality gap for women, for minorities, and for all groups, it closed more between 35 and 65 than it has from 65 to today. And that's because unionization climbed so fast between 1935 and 1965, where almost 40% of the population was organized in 1965. And Karen does a great job of telling the story, but what I've really stolen from her message is that all this great work that these people did prior to us is really what closed the gap for civil rights, what closed the gap for equal rights, what closed the gap for women, what closed the gap for all people that have fought for equality. And we have always been side by side with these individuals, and Teamsters have always been at their best in times of adversity. And even when, you know, there were challenging times in America, our members always were where they needed to be and did what they needed to do. And she just does a phenomenal job of telling the story. We couldn't be more honored to have her tell this story for our members. And ultimately, one of the reasons why we're recording tonight is we realized the last time we did this, we didn't record it. And we want to be able to utilize this to be able to educate more members going forward. And that when people bring up the issue, and that whether you're white, you're black, you're Latino, you're a woman, you're LGBT, it doesn't matter. You know, you need to see this fight for equality that's gone on for almost 100 years, and how we have always been at the center of that with members, with our leadership, and the great work that everybody does. And Karen just does a great job. So thank you so much, Karen, for being here tonight. And it's 9 o'clock where you're at. So thank you for being up late. And, you know, with no more introduction, here you go.
Okay, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I mean, sometimes I get embarrassed when you say stuff like that, because it's like, you know, not really. But let me share my screen here so that everybody can see where we're going. And tonight we are going to talk specifically about Teamsters and the civil rights movement and the involvement that we've had with that. You know, I could talk about women's rights. I could talk about us taking a stand during crisis. All of those things are things that the Teamsters have done. But one of the founding principles of this union was that it was a union for everyone. And so with that, I want to start talking a little bit about there we go. So here's what the question I'm putting out is, why did these mostly Irish guys that formed the early Teamsters Union, Mike Casey, Tom Hughes, Jerry McSweeney, Dan Tobin, all of these guys that had been team drivers after the Civil War, when they start banding together to create a union, as they first did in 1899, and then the union that we know today was formed in 1903. Why did they think it was so important to make sure that part of that union included their brothers who were Black team drivers during the Civil War? To them, it was essential because the way they looked at the world was, we are young and we are changing the way that the world is viewed. And so we want to make sure that everyone is included in that picture. So in 1903, as I said, we came together and created the union that we know today. Previous to that, 1899, the first Team Drivers International Union is formed. But by 1902, typical Teamsters, they're fighting amongst themselves. So in 1902, a group, particularly from Chicago, breaks off and creates another union. So in 1903, they're encouraged to get together and create one union. So they go to Niagara Falls and they intend to amalgamate and create one union, which becomes the union we know today. At that meeting, there is a Black delegate who is in the center of, sitting in between the two white guys in the picture. His name is T.A. Storrs. T.A. Storrs was a delegate from Chicago, from local number 10 in Chicago of the National Teamsters Union, which was that breakoff group. He stands up as the formation of the new union is going on, and he says, look, you've included minorities. We have sisters here as well who are team drivers and do other functions for team drivers, like cook for them and stuff. How are we going to protect them? You're saying you want us, but what about down the line? What if people don't want us here anymore? How are we going to survive in the union? Well, from that very point, it's obvious that Black lives and women's lives matter to the Teamsters, because what they say is, okay, T.A. Storrs, here's what we want you to do. We want you with some other members to write the Constitution so that we do find a way to protect those groups within our union, because the truth was the vast majority of the union was white guys, and a lot of them were Irish guys. Part of the thing with the Irish members was they had always been treated poorly themselves, and they did not want their Black brothers to be treated the way they had been treated when they first came to the United States. So T.A. Storrs takes off, they write the Constitution, and what they come up with is this: they say right in our Constitution that anyone of any race, gender, religion, or ethnicity can be a member of the Teamsters Union. Now, why this is so extraordinary is because every other industrial union at the time said right in their constitution that you had to be a white Christian male to be a member of the union. So right from the get-go, we are way ahead of the game. And just as an aside, T.A. Storrs goes on to be very much a leader in the Teamsters Union. And in 1907, he is identified in a book that was put out identifying leading Black Americans in the United States. The book came out in 1907. And one of the prime people in that book is T.A. Storrs, who was the very own author of our Constitution. Now, the Teamsters look weird to other unions because, for example, this picture on the left is the executive board of the First New Orleans Local, a southern city in 1903 that has an executive board that is half Black and half white. When I first saw the picture, I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, that can't be right. It was right. That was how Teamsters ran their unions. If there was Black members that were up for leadership, they were included in those leadership groups. Now, another thing I want to talk about is more related to women. Dan Tobin becomes the president of the Teamsters Union in 1907. Dan Tobin and others with him, Tom Hughes, John Gillespie, Mike Casey, are all very progressive, very forward-thinking men. Tobin wants women to be organized more and to be more included in the union, and he certainly wants minority workers, Black and on the West Coast, Hispanic workers to be included. In 1916, he decides that he is going to organize laundry women in Chicago. And the first thing he does is say that he is going to teach the women to negotiate their own contract. And people are like, dude, why? And he's like, it's their contract. They should have a voice in what comes down in their contract. So he does that. And then he says, and we're going to make a non-negotiable part of this contract that, and I'm going to use the language of the time, that colored women and white women will be paid the same. Now, everybody sort of flips out in the public and so forth. They think this is a step too far. And Tobin says, nope, we're going to go with this. Well, he starts getting death threats for this. And one of the reasons that I appreciate him so much as one of our leaders was his response. His response was, well, they can only kill you once. It might as well be for something good. We are going forward. Well, the truth is he won. The very first colorblind contract in the United States was a contract for laundry women in Chicago. Now, it's never taught. You don't learn it in your high school junior year American history class, but that was the beginning of equality in the workforce. And it was that contract that the Teamsters did. White women and Black women now were earning the exact same wage. And that was the only place that that was happening. And we move further. The following year in our magazine, this was posted. Equal pay for equal work should become a constant, vigorous slogan among all employees in all crafts. The strength and brains of women and girls are exploited the world over, and especially so in the United States. And they go on to say that this must be fought against. Members of both sexes should band together and swat the curse from all parts of the earth where it exists. This is 1917, folks. And this is not university people. This is not highfalutin thinkers. This is working class people saying, hey, everybody needs to be treated the same. And it's not just any working people, it's Teamster working people who are leading the way and saying this. By 1919, the Teamsters' core motto is equal pay for all. The United States government does not pick that up until 1974 with the Equal Employment Act. And even then it wasn't carried through, but in the Teamsters, it most certainly was. Teamsters support progressive ideas like votes for women. And as a little bit lighter side, they also overcome controversy. In World War I, women were stepping up to the plate and taking on jobs as men went overseas to fight and to teach soldiers. Teamsters taught soldiers how to drive in World War I motor trucks. So women were delivering the goods, and they could deliver everything except one thing, and that was alcohol, in particular beer. It was immoral for a woman to deliver beer. So Dan Tobin says, hey, I get it, I go to mass, but let me just tell you, I don't have a lot of drivers, so if women aren't delivering beer, there won't be any beer delivery. And lo and behold, suddenly it is not immoral for women to deliver beer. And that's what that woman in the picture is doing. So women are inching their way up. They're getting more and more equality, not only in terms of wages, but in terms of the kind of jobs that they're allowed to take on. In 1921, auto buses were becoming the way to have public transportation. And one of our locals, local 237 in Houston, Texas, was an auto bus local, and it had the Teamsters' very first principal officer. Her name was Mrs. S.J. Smith. Now, the interesting thing about Mrs. S.J. is that, first of all, at this time, women have just gotten the right to vote in the United States on a federal level, but they had not yet been granted the right to vote in the Union because before that, they couldn't vote in federal elections, so they couldn't vote in the Union. Mrs. S.J. Smith is elected as principal officer with not even being able to vote for herself. So the men voted her into office. Now, another interesting thing about Mrs. S.J., when you look in the roster for 1921, and she is listed as the principal officer, there is a little C in parentheses after her name. Now that we're on Zoom format, I can't ask you to answer what you think that might be, but the letter C indicates that Mrs. S.J. Smith was colored. So not only was she the first woman principal officer, she was a Black woman in a Southern state, and she is elected by the men. She must have been a hell of a leader to be selected as the leader of this local by her men members. She stays principal officer for a couple of years. We were having trouble finding more information about her, but I am able to track her after she is the principal officer for several years. She moves to Austin and she becomes a political leader and part of the early civil rights movement in Texas. So extraordinary woman, extraordinary circumstances, but seemingly every day for the Teamsters. Other women move into leadership roles, and as you can see, Black women. Eula Cleveland is the first woman, and certainly the first Black woman elected to an executive board. Clara Day becomes a business agent in Chicago and later becomes the director of community services. The Teamsters took an active role in World War II as they had in World War I. One of the things that they do in World War II is they build the Red Ball Highway. It's called the Red Ball Express. The Red Ball Express is the main supply line that runs through Europe. This is the road that General Patton takes to go into Germany. This is where all of the action is taking place. It's a great road, much utilized. There's even a movie made about the Red Ball Express. Unfortunately, in the movie, they forget a couple of things. One, they forget to mention that it is Teamsters who are leaders in what becomes the Quartermaster Truck Corps who build the road. And what they really forget to mention is that most of the people running that Red Ball Express are Black Teamsters. They don't even mention that in the movie. And here you can see these are the men who ran that Red Ball Express. And I want people to know about them and to know their story, because World War II could possibly have had a different outcome had not the Red Ball Express been as successful and as important as it was. But yet these men are relegated to the backside of history. So I want to make sure that you all recognize what these men did. Teamsters also pushed for Black members to be allowed to move up into better positions during the war. Previously, particularly in the South, Black truck drivers were not allowed to drive trucks. They were allowed to work in the yard, to park the trucks, to load the trucks, but they were not allowed to have better paying jobs of actually driving the trucks. And so when men were going overseas to fight in the war, the Teamsters used this as an excuse to be able to push their Black members into those higher paying jobs. And then of course, once the war was over, the men were already in those jobs, therefore they were able to maintain those higher wages. So that's what the Teamsters are doing for all of their members as the war is going on. They're doing it for women as well. Women members are working on the Alaska Highway. In fact, most of the highway was built by women Teamsters. Women are doing deliveries. This woman down here, Maisie Lanham, is the very first woman UPS driver. She is hired and appointed in 1943, and she is then quickly joined by other women, and they were known as UPS Brown Betties. That was their nickname during the war years. I want to talk a little bit about Joe Nero. Joe Nero was a man who ended up being our oldest living Teamster. He was out of local 272 in New York City. He worked at a car garage service in New York City. Now, Joe came from the South. He came from Texas. His father was the first Black plumber allowed to work in Houston. Joe helped him out, lived in Texas, and decided he wanted to move to New York City and be out on his own. So he moves, he gets a job at the car service. Joe works with the guys and becomes friends with the guys in his local. His best friend is a white man also named Joe. And Joe talks a lot about how people gave him a hard time when he and Joe first became friends, because they were an interracial friendship. Now, the interesting thing with Joe is that in the 1940s, Hertz bought the car service where he worked, and they did not want a Black man to be the lead mechanic, which Joe was at the time. So they sat up tests and deliveries that Joe had to do in order to maintain his position, but they were set up so that he would fail, so that he would not have enough time or the correct tools to do what he needed to do to pass the test. His Teamster brothers went around and corrected everything so that Joe would pass the test. And these were white and Black members that he worked with. Joe does pass. He becomes the lead mechanic for Hertz. He stays in that position till he retires in 1974. Now, Joe stays very active with the Teamsters. He's an organizer. He goes into schools all the way up until he's 98 years old. At that point, he starts to lose his eyesight a little bit. I interviewed Joe when he was 104. He still lived on his own in Harlem. He still went to his local pub and had a pint every day. And he had an 87-year-old girlfriend. So he was a true Teamster in all of his aspects. He loved the union. And he lived to be 106 years old. But I wanted you to see him so that you could see how he and other stand-up Teamsters fought against the status quo and the corporate ideal of the time, which was they didn't want to have their face in leadership being a Black man. And the Teamsters said, no, he is your lead mechanic. He's going to stay your lead mechanic. We also had Teamsters in the South, in St. Louis. Harold Gibbons and his right-hand man, Ernest Calloway, came up with a lot of urban renewal in St. Louis. They went through and were leaders in cleaning out the slums and creating housing and helping Black workers move up into better paying jobs. They had what they called total person unionism in terms of taking care of the whole member's life, making sure that their housing was good, that their schooling for their children was good, that they had opportunities to advance the same as their white brothers and sisters did. And this total person unionism spreads through the Teamsters throughout the whole country. In terms of civil rights, I want to talk a little bit about Sid Zagre. Sid Zagre was the director of Drive, which was our political arm in the Teamsters, and he was also very much a civil rights leader. He works a lot with Dr. King and other leaders. In 1967, he is at a meeting of civil rights and labor leaders in Montgomery, Alabama. They are in a restaurant. They're in a private room of this restaurant having this meeting. A fire breaks out. The rescue efforts are slow in coming, and 26 people, or ends up being about 30 people, end up dying in this fire. The only areas that were destroyed by the fire was the private room where the labor and civil rights individuals were holding their meeting. But the Montgomery officials in the city call it a tragic accident, and they do not investigate it any further. And clearly, as we're looking back on it, clearly it was an attack on labor and civil rights leaders. But Sid very often doesn't get mentioned because he died so early in the civil rights movement, and he's been kind of lost to history. But I want people to know that the Teamsters had folks that were right up there with Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy in fighting for civil rights. The Teamsters are one of the only unions to have Black organizers. One of the first Black organizers is Gid Parham. He is out of Local 728. in Atlanta. And when he is appointed, Weldon Mathis was the principal officer. He would get calls every week. Now, this is in the 50s when Gid was appointed, from sheriffs in small towns saying to him, Weldon, we got a boy here that says he's one of yours, but it doesn't seem likely to us that you would hire him. And Weldon would have to say, yes, he is my lead organizer, let him go. And he had to do this over and over. This did not deter Gid one iota. Gid goes on to become quite a civil rights leader, along with Tony Zivulich, who some of you may know, Josh Zivulich. Tony was his father, also from the South. Gid and Tony did a lot of far-reaching civil rights preaching, if you will, in the Southern states. I want to talk just briefly about Robbie Jupiter and Ben Turner. Both of these are Black stewards that were highlighted in the Teamster magazine. Now, that doesn't seem like such a big deal, but at the time, it was a huge deal that a Black woman is shown in 1955 to be on equal footing with the principal officer in the picture there. She's sitting with Don Peters, who's the principal officer of Local 743, where she's at. She is shown in a 5-page spread, being the leader of her members, being a supervisor over men. It shows her personal life. That was never done. First of all, it's a woman, and second of all, it's a Black woman, and she's being highlighted. 2 years later, Ben Turner, also from Local 728, is highlighted in the magazine. He gets a 6-page spread showing him his hobbies, showing him on equal footing with white members, and in fact being over white members in some circumstances on the job. And this is highly unusual. Teamsters are the only union that was willing to showcase their Black members in this way. And again, the way they look at it at this point, Jimmy Hoffa is being elected president, and he's like, well, I don't look at it as their Black members, I look at it as their members, and we're highlighting them because they're good stewards. Organizing in the South, Hoffa really wanted for us to be able to spread our organizing in the South, but we had a problem in the South, and that was we refused to follow Jim Crow law. Many places in the South would only allow the unions to have halls if there was a hall for white members and a separate hall for Black members. And Tobin and Hoffa both said, absolutely not. We have one hall. So that was why we traditionally did not have a lot of locals in the South. Here, Hoffa is down in the South doing an organizing campaign. You can see this woman doesn't want anything to do with it. He thinks it's a riot. This was a chemical plant they were trying to organize in the South. It was a very, very important, large plant that they really wanted, had a lot of workers, they really wanted to get it. So Hoffa came down personally to help organize. And some of the white workers came to him and said, look, we really want to be Teamsters, but we don't want to have to be in the hall with Blacks. So if you will agree to have separate meetings and separate halls, we will vote to join the Teamsters. And Hoffa said, absolutely not. And they went ahead, they finished the campaign, and sure enough, as he feared, they lost. And Hoffa's response was, well, that's fine. We didn't want them anyway, because they don't think like Teamsters think. So that was just one of the efforts. This letter went out from James R. Hoffa in 1958 to all of the locals. And it is asking them to support a young preacher in Montgomery, Alabama, who was running a bus boycott. And of course, that young preacher was Martin Luther King. And this started the formal participation of the Teamsters in the now burgeoning civil rights movement. We did support Dr. King. From that point, we also had Teamsters going down to Freedom Village, where there were protesters, Black protesters. We were sending supplies to them. We had members who became freedom riders, and we had members who were going down south to various cities to help the organizing of members, Black members being able to vote. At this time also, James R. Hoffa sets up DRIVE. DRIVE was designed as our political arm, and it was to help us lobby so that labor issues would be at the forefront of legislation, and that leaders in the Senate and in the House would know that we were keeping an eye on what they were doing. A lot of the DRIVE effort, particularly in the 60s, was done by women. Joe Hoffa trained and brought more than 15,000 women to Washington between 1962 and 1968 to lobby. They were so successful that what they did became known as the Great Conversation around Washington, D.C. And you can see in the pictures, it was Black women and white women together. They rode buses together to come to Washington, D.C. This got a lot of criticism from the public because these women were not segregating themselves. One bus in particular, the story, those of you who may know Tyson Johnson, who was one of our VPs, his mother was one of the original DRIVE women. They were on a bus coming up from Louisiana, stopped in Virginia, went into a drugstore, and some of their Black sisters were told they couldn't come into the drugstore. This was in Southern Virginia. So every single woman got off that bus and went into that drugstore and just stood there until the Black sisters were allowed to come in. So they were very, very much wanting to make sure that everyone was treated equally. The DRIVE women helped pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act. They very much helped pass the 1965 Voting Rights Act by causing a ruckus when it was getting ready to be tabled in the Senate. They helped pass the Medicare Act, and they registered thousands of voters in the South and elsewhere. The Voting Rights Act, which the Teamster women helped so much to pass, is still important. Back in the day, you can see in this picture, a woman is being given a test to see if she's eligible to vote. Sitting across from her is a young white man who is intimidating the hell out of her. And on the test were questions like, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? And if you get the questions right, you don't get to vote. Well, the Voting Rights Act stopped all of that nonsense, but today, 2007, they tried to get rid of the Voting Rights Act. They're trying to get rid of it now. And with gerrymandering and with all this nonsense about you have to have a special ID, you have to pay money to get this special ID, it is simply another way to keep folks from being able to vote. And therefore, the Teamsters have been vigilant and need to stay vigilant. When somebody says, oh, we don't need those old acts anymore, we damn well still do need those acts, because very quickly, freedoms are taken away. And they're done in sneaky ways at these days. They don't maybe have a thug sitting across the aisle from the woman taking the test, but they're passing legislation in late night meetings and so forth, so that the public is not aware of what's going on. Teamsters from all over the country marched in the March on Washington in 1963. Hoffa was very angry at that march because Kennedy did not want this march to happen. And on the day of the march, Kennedy, rather than attending the march or giving some sort of endorsement to it, he has a meeting with manufacturers, and they talk about automation and how to bring the numbers of the working force down. Hoffa never forgave Kennedy for doing that on the very day of the March on Washington. Here are some more pictures of locals who are attending that march. Local 743, Local 810. Members of Local 810 were working the late shift the night before, got off their late shift, jumped on a bus, drove all night to get to the march on that Wednesday that it was held in August of '63. Teamsters marched and sent supplies to the march on Selma. This happens to be Local 239. Viola Luzo, who is a housewife who is participating in the sign up, register to vote in Detroit. Here's the call to go down and join Martin Luther King in Selma. She believes, she and her friend, best friend, a Black woman, Sarah Evans, believe that they can change the world. She goes down to Selma, and unfortunately, she is shot and killed by the Ku Klux Klan at that march in Selma. This is a quote from David Dennis at James Chaney's funeral. He was one of the 3 young men who were killed in the summer of 1964. They were civil rights workers. If you read this, you can feel the same frustration, the same heart sickness that we're facing today with the death of George Floyd and all the other Black men and women who have been killed in our country, and that the civil rights movement seems to have gone away. The gains that we made seem to have been forgotten. It's powerful words then, and it's still very powerful words today, and ones that we need to remember. I ask you, he says, to be sick and tired of this. I'm tired of people of this country allowing this thing to continue to happen. We have to stand up. That could be being said today, and is being said today. Not so happy days. You can see here, this young woman on the right is not liking the change to her vision of the world at all. The picture on on the right side, Black folks had come to a motel to stay. They were at a civil rights event, and the manager of the hotel did not want Black people in his pool. So he is pouring bleach into the water that they are in, causing them to have to leave the pool. One of the best civil rights tool is a Teamster contract. That was James R. Hoffa's belief. And one of the best contracts he ever did was the National Freight Agreement, which covered 480,000 Teamster members and 16,000 freight companies in one contract. People were moving up to the middle class more than any other time in history. And you can see on the sign here, everybody is getting an equal shot. Teamsters say involved with King until his death. The last formal photograph taken of King was actually at Local 522 in Rahway, New Jersey, just the day before he went to Memphis. And here Teamsters are marching in King's funeral procession. Jimmy Hoffa talks about civil rights and how it is important that we support, that the labor movement be a leader in the civil rights movement, that if there are barriers beyond which some may go and others may not, this is not what we stand for. So he takes a very, very strong stance on that. One season, now more than 56 years ago, the efforts of a few helped make a difference for the many. Freedom Summer in 1964. That season has come again. History is now, history is you. We cannot give up what they so long ago, what Jimmy Hoffa, working with Dr. King, was able to start within our union. We will do it again and again until we get it right. We will fight, we will march, we will sing, we will do whatever it takes until we help make it right. That is the Teamsters mantra. Here you can see this member is saying, I marched with King, and now here I am having to march again. This may not go on. We cannot be lost in a sea of despair. We have to push forward. We've been successful in doing it in the past, and we cannot let go now. This picture to me is just very powerful. These folks are saving the life of who is their enemy. All right. And that is, to me, so powerful, that they look beyond what might be a threat to themselves to do what they are trained to do. And that's what Teamsters need to do. We need to overlook those things that may be a threat to us and do what is right. And this is a statement that was in the 1909 Teamster magazine, and it talks about the true union man will exert himself more than ever to build up his union. Organized labor is now in a crisis, which will tend to strengthen it forever. And we are in a crisis. We are in a crisis in our country. We're in a crisis with the labor movement in terms of people falling away. And it says here, only in the time of war is the true soldier proven. And that is the mantra for us all. It is the time that we need to take that legacy, to take what those brothers and sisters have done over this last 115 or so years, take that DNA that they gave to us, take that legacy, take that energy, and really push it forward so that our grandchildren will be able, or our great-grandchildren will be able to say, yep, the Teamsters stepped up to the plate one more time and they made a difference. That the folks that died in 2020 did not die in vain. So with that, that is my overview for you on Teamsters and the civil rights. I hope you enjoyed that. It's not an uplifting, so to speak. We're talking about a lot of sad and unfortunate things that happened, but the Teamsters were able to rise above that and make sure that their members, at least, were able to experience equality. And with that, I'm going to take it off my screen share. And if anybody has any questions or whatever, I'm happy to answer them.
I don't see any. Karen, as always, I can't even thank you enough. Every time you speak, I become prouder and prouder and prouder to be a Teamster. And I know there's a lot of people in this room who've never heard the history, and I hope that they're just as proud too, because there's a lot of amazing history. We've done a lot of amazing things. Man, I just can't even thank you enough, Karen. Every time you speak, man, I tell you.
Well, I always enjoy coming to your local, and I'm gonna, if it's all right, I'm gonna stay on because I'd like to hear
absolutely
part of the program. So
thank
you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be at your local.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Seriously, we love you. You know that. Up next, we have a short video from James Kirby. He's the Southern Coordinating Organizer for the International, and he's also the chairman of the Teamsters National Black Caucus. And his video is going to give you guys a brief overview of the Teamsters National Black Caucus history. With that, Mario, would you go ahead and launch his video?
Hello, brothers and sisters. I'm James Kirby, National Chairman of the Teamsters National Black Caucus, proud member of Teamsters Local 480 in Nashville, Tennessee, Southern Region Organizing Coordinator for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. I hope everyone is doing well today and safe during these trying times that we're living in America today. I'm here to talk to you about the Teamsters National Black Caucus. I want to give you a brief history of the Teamsters National Black Caucus, better known as TNBC for short. In Miami, Florida, at the 20th IBT convention on July the 7th, 1971, the Teamsters National Black Caucus held their first meeting to discuss the lack of Black leaders being appointed or hired at the International Union. Also, that the Black delegates wasn't allowed to sit with their white counterparts. Also, that Blacks was used in Black crisis as special organizers, but was not given the title nor the salaries. Robert Simpson, a member of Teamsters Local 743, was appointed the delegate spokesperson to speak with the Journal President and several vice presidents. Out of this meeting, the Journal President and the Vice Presidents agreed to appoint a committee to address the concerns of the Black delegates. Also, they promised that before the 1976 convention, that they would consider Blacks to be appointed to the Journal Executive Board of any vacancies. In 1975, John Cleveland was appointed the first chairperson of the Teamsters National Black Caucus in Chicago, Illinois. Also, that same year, it was the first year of the Teamsters National Black Caucus Educational Conference that still goes on to this day. Also in 1976, John Cleveland was the first Black vice president of the IBT. The Teamsters National Black Caucus has had a strong mission of educating its members to uphold the principles of the Teamsters movement and foster the opportunity for all Teamsters to serve in the leadership capacity throughout the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and its affiliates, to unite Blacks and other minorities and other persons of goodwill, promoting cultural, civic, legislative, political, educational, and fraternal, charitable, welfare, social, and other activities which further the interests of the minorities directly or indirectly, to assist financially, moral, and otherwise other organizations having purpose and objectives related to this organization, to engage the community in activities which will advance the interests of this organization and its members and its community nationally, directly and indirectly. The TNBC will assist the IBT and its affiliates at all times. The TNBC has grown over the years to develop chapters throughout the country, to develop organizers, leaders in this union. The TNBC is an organization of men and women that's looking to address the special concerns of Black Teamsters and other people of goodwill at all times. Today, we're faced with many objectives that we faced back in 1971 as Black Teamsters and also as union members. We must continue to be vigilant in addressing these issues and continue to educate not only the Black members in the Teamsters Union, but every union member. We're faced today in a political landscape that we've never seen before. As Black Teamsters and as union members, we must be vigilant and taking part in electoral votes and making sure that our concerns are heard, not only as Black members, but as union members overall. Currently today, in the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, we have more equality and more diversity than we have in the past. We currently have 22 Black principal officers, 2 females and 20 males throughout the country. We have international organizers. We have international representatives that we didn't have in 1971. We still have a long way to go. I encourage you and your friends to get involved in the Teamsters National Black Caucus. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is invited. I invite you to go to our website, www.gotnbc.com, to get more information about the Teamsters National Black Caucus, as we are faced in a nation today with police brutality, and it's our civic duty to be involved and engage. There again, I encourage you to go to www.gotnbc.com to get more information about the Teamsters National Black Caucus. We will continue to educate our members and engage members on a day-to-day basis to get more involved in the union and also the Teamsters National Black Caucus. Thank you.
Real quickly, Mario is going to put up a slide with all of our current committees and caucuses with the contact info for you guys. If you don't have a chance to write it down, don't stress. We'll make sure we have all that available when we send this recording out to you guys. And Carlos, I see that you had your hand up for Karen. Before we move on, I wanted to get your question out there real quick too.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hi, Karen. It's always a pleasure to hear you teach. I look forward to it. So thank you for coming on here. I appreciate it. My question is, how can we, as even a local or an organization, because I know that there's every month, I believe it's the month of April, that they're supposed to teach labor history, but that seems to not be, the message doesn't seem to be getting across. So
No.
what can we do, looking at what you just taught, be that inspiration to maybe push these politicians or local leaders to get that into the forefront? The same way that TNBC was formed, a bunch of people just getting together saying, hey, this is what we need to get together for. How can we do that to push our message, whether it's on a national level or even start at a state level as an organization? Because I know we put a lot of money into Drive and getting our message across politically, but it seems like if we would have put that same energy into getting this education piece, it'll all coincide. It'll help in organizing. It'll help in our political agenda. It'll help with just everything, because a lot of youth don't know what the Teamsters are unless their parents or relatives are a Teamster member.
You're absolutely right. You know, I always tell the story about I was going to do a program and I had my Teamster bag, and there were some college kids that were also in the hotel. And one of them finally, they'd been talking and, you know, and pointing, and I thought, oh God, they're, you know, coming up with some Teamster thug thing. But finally, one of them came over and he said, who are the Team Masters? So they had no idea who we were. One of the things that we did with our 100th anniversary video, and I want to update that video, we sent that out to all the schools for them to use. I did a whole labor history lesson for them. All they had to do was implement it. We need to do more of that. Get in your kids' school, go in and talk. It doesn't matter if they're primary school age or high school. You know, we've got some kids' books we did. We've got another one coming out. We're actually doing a book on Joe Nero. So get out there. The other thing that we need to do is go to the school boards and push for labor education. Go to the school board meetings. Wisconsin is the only state through pushing Teamsters, and it was Teamsters that did it, pushed so hard that now it's mandatory to teach labor education in the schools in Wisconsin. We need to do that in other states. We need to go to the school boards. You need to go to your mayor's office and keep bombarding them that you're not teaching the whole of American history. The other thing that we need to do, and I've talked about this a lot and everybody keeps going, yeah, Karen, whatever. But you know how the Gap does posters and it'll just say the Gap at the bottom and it'll be a picture of somebody in clothes or whatever. We need to do a series of posters that it just says Teamsters and has pictures of our workers that we plaster everywhere so people know who we are and that what we've done. The other thing that we need to do is we need to start buying some local radio time and doing little history bits and modern bits. It doesn't cost, it costs a lot for national ads, but it doesn't cost that much for a local ad. NPR is brought to you every morning by the Laborers Union. Why aren't the Teamsters bringing you something? We should be doing that every day. But anyway, that's just kind of a quick answer.
Well, I like that answer. It's inspiring. I'm thinking, you said put something out, even in some of the local cities that we represent. If we were to take out a full page ad talking like every week something on Teamster history,
Yes.
where people would look forward to reading that.
That's
and
exactly right.
Or maybe in a school newspaper, something like that, take that full page ad out. It's a great
Yes.
idea.
Yeah, perfect.
I have some good news. We did go to speak at the San Bernardino School Board, and they actually, and we asked them to honor AB, I think it's, gosh, off the top of my head. God, I always know by heart. Anyways, there's an assembly bill that actually, they should be teaching labor history in the month of May, and San Bernardino School Board agreed, and they reached out to myself and Randy, and they want to have more talks with us and with you, Karen, to help them come up with that curriculum for the San
I've
Bernardino.
already designed one.
I told them that. The doctor that called us, I said, Karen Jones, our historian, already designed the curriculum, so you don't even have to do it. He said, we'll be in touch. So
okay, good.
I wanted to share that because that is awesome. And now moving on, we're going to have my brother, Atrius Chandler. He's going to speak. Atrius, go ahead and take it away, my brother.
Thank you very much. Good evening, brothers and sisters. It's good to talk to you. I appreciate you tuning in at this late hour. Let me briefly speak to you about some of the history and current state of affairs that we're going through. As you've heard, Teamsters have been ahead of the curve when it comes to racial and gender equality for a very long time, as discussed by our previous speakers. I reiterate that the reason we are here yet again is because of the widespread belief that we are not being treated fairly. It is a desire for social equality that is the driver of this movement and our support for it. So ask yourself, is the glass half empty or is it half full? I think that the first thing we as Teamsters should have to realize is that we have to approach this with the proper mindset. So again, is the glass half empty or is it half full? I believe that the glass is more than half full because we have made some significant progress, but we still have a ways to go. This is evidenced by the ongoing civil unrest that we see today. Some would say that this is the result of opportunistic criminals, but that is by no means the vast majority of peaceful demonstrations that I have attended and seen, and you can look at it on the news. And that would ignore the fact that this fight for racial and gender equality has happened before. The overarching feeling of injustice has happened many times in the past. There is usually a flare-up of violence in response to the murder of unarmed Black folks about every 20 or 30 years, dating back before the 1830s, when Black folks were severely mistreated and murdered just because. By way of example, I was recently watching Netflix, and the movie Free State of Jones was currently on there. It was a true story about the struggle for equality and how far some people will go to keep others from voting. I encourage you to check it out. Be aware that some scenes are graphic. Someone from the past back then would look at things now and say that we have come a long way. those of us in the here and now strongly feel that we still have much more work to do to gain equality. This is because people continue to express racist, hateful things and make it a part of their political platform. I am not just talking about one person. In this day and age, it is just plain unacceptable. It's unacceptable to treat people unfairly based on race, gender, or sexual orientation. It is just more prevalent now because we have elected officials who gaslight, dog whistle, and plainly condone this behavior. Also, social media makes it permanent now. So it's just not the case where you could say something racist to a friend of yours, and the moment after it's said, it's forgotten. Because of social media, the things you say or a position that you take are permanent. So we can be looking back on it and say, you know, that person was a racist from way back when. For example, when they would not allow Black tenants in their apartments, just as an example. I think that we all have to analyze the way we look at the world and the things that we say about it and reflect on that. I say all that to say this. I've been having discussions with people who take an opposing view to mine, especially in the political climate now and this close to the election. One of the things that is very prevalent in their argument is that it's a free country and they can say whatever they want. Well, you can express a political opinion about things, but you can't just say whatever you want and expect that there's no consequence for that. First of all, some speech is not protected by the Constitution. Depending upon what you say and when and where you say it, you might be in trouble. You can't express racist, hateful things and expect that to be okay. On the contrary, usually when your employer finds out that you say something like that, they fire you, especially in the private sector, because it affects their income. For example, that woman that called the cops on the Black guy in the park, remember that? She lost her job and they're going to criminally prosecute her now for her behavior. So all I'm saying is to think before you speak. You know, when I teach martial arts to my students, I always tell them, your kung fu, your martial arts is here, not in your fists. To think before you act and to treat people the way you want to be treated. Because if someone disagrees with you, it's not the end of the world. You can probably find common ground depending upon your approach and your attitude. Saying that, keep in mind, hate speech is not protected under the Constitution, nor any place else should it be tolerated. I think that some people are surprised in the fact that a little bit shocked when they realize that they said a hateful, derogatory thing and they get called out on it. Like when the suspect that shot Ahmaud Arbery shouted the N-word right after the murder, and he had the gall to declare that he was not a racist. Then they all act surprised and shocked when they don't understand why everybody's so upset about it. The time has long been past for our society to stop tolerating racism, hate, and social inequality. So the thing is, when we engage in political discourse, as we are doing now, or when we express our opinion, just be mindful of the fact that even though someone may have an opposing opinion, we should still be civil enough to each other and open-minded enough to at least consider a different point of view. Case in point, different religious beliefs. We may be of different faiths, but we are all Americans. The reason we are here again is because some people in our society refuse to acknowledge that struggle that minorities and women and people of differing genders are going through, and we're trying to make things better. From a treatment perspective, if a patient refuses to acknowledge that they even have an illness, it makes the situation that much more difficult to treat. Example, smoking. The doctor tells you, hey, you probably need to stop that. Well, I'm going to tell you that it costs you money because your insurance goes up, and healthcare goes up. It's a bad thing, but you still have people that smoke. And don't get me wrong, I understand that people struggle with it. My grandmother struggled with it for 60 years, and it was hard. But yet, we still got to try to make that change. It's like not wearing a seatbelt or not wearing a mask. I was in Bass Pro Shop the other day with another friend of mine. We were talking about the military, talking about us eating MREs. Those are meals ready to eat, the little lunches they give us in the military. And some kid turned around and got in our conversation talking about he didn't want to wear a mask. I reminded him, or I told him, look, man, I work in and around the jails, and I go into the jails on a regular basis, and they have COVID-19. I'm not wearing this mask to protect me I'm wearing this mask to protect you. And so he kind of shut up and turned around. We all really need to listen to each other and be more open-minded. The heart of our labor movement is to find common ground so that we can get together and organize to have a better quality of life for all workers and people in general. Even water rises all boats. We would love to be able to depend on employers to do the right thing, but they have proven time and time again that they won't. If Jeff Bezos would take some of the 100 billion, that's billion with a B, of the money that he's made and improve the lives of his 780,000 employees, that's right, you got 780,000 people working for Amazon, we wouldn't be worried about them. But yet he chooses profits over people. Just think about the buying power of all those workers would have if they had shopped for healthcare as a single unit, but they can't. And that is why we need to stand up and organize them and others who can't stand up for themselves. This is made worse for minorities, women, and persons in the LGBTQ+ community. The Teamsters has progressed to an all-inclusive organization that respects the opinions of every member, whether they be Democrats, Republicans, or independents. We still respect your opinion. Just know that it is our mission to protect employee rights, first and foremost. We want you to have a better life, to improve your quality of life, and to let your voice be heard. I don't care who you are and what party you're in. If you support workers' rights and equality, we support you. That's what the democratic process is about. When you vote, every time you vote, you exercise the democratic process, and that's what we want. If you disagree with someone on a position, on a measure, let your voice be heard. Let us know in the same token to participate in the democratic process. Make sure that you vote. Let me say that again, folks. Make sure that you vote. The bottom line is, I like to help people when I can. It's my passion. Some people you can't help. And when I realize that some people refuse to change their mind or refuse to accept my help, I'm getting better. And my wiser, more learned colleagues here are telling me just get better about saying okay and be okay with it. Now, you know, if they don't understand where I'm coming from, you know, and people don't want to see my perspective on things and don't care about my past experiences or the discrimination and racism that I have personally experienced, I don't rage about it. I have to move on and hope that someday they will gain a little bit more understanding for their fellow human beings and, you know, kind of consider things from a different perspective. As long as they don't put their hands on me or try to harm me in any way, we'll be okay. Just like our no on you in Grand Terrace action. We talked to the yes on you people and everything was fine, even though I personally think that we got the better of the discussion. Isn't that right, Randy? We agreed to disagree, but yet and still it was political discourse. Remember, folks, we are much stronger together. And we are much stronger when we focus on what unites us instead of what divides us. I can't let this go without at least commenting on what Dr. King said in the past. And I said this before and I'll say it again because it's so powerful to me. We may all have come from different ships, but we are in the same boat now. And like I said before, we are all in this together. And you know what? Malcolm X even said, you cannot be so blinded with patriotism that you can't face reality. What's wrong is wrong, no matter who does it or who says it. And with that, let me end by saying, please come check out our websites and the organizations that we support. We're going to put that up. Mario, you can put that link up that we support, like TNBC, LGBTQ+, the Hispanic Caucus, the Women's Conference, and any other organizations and the politicians that we have endorsed and the measures that we have endorsed. We have a full list and a sheet as to why we endorse these people and these measures, because it generally helps people better their lives. In the end, we are about what unites us rather than what divides us. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you staying along.
All right. Good job, Atreus. You said it well. You know, we got to come together and you know, right this ship and like I think Jill in the chat said, you know, come together and bring this country forward. That's what we're going to do. That's what Teamsters have always done. So, and we're going to continue our part. So thank you, Atreus, and thank you, Karen. You guys, that is going to complete the night. And again, we are recording this. We will get this out to and make this available to everybody as soon as possible. And please share away because this is amazing history. And I want everyone to be as proud as we all are to be Teamsters. So thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you.